Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buen día. Tengan todas
Good
las personas
morning. Good morning to everyone participating in this virtual room, as well as those of you that are following this event through social media. I remind you that we are broadcasting live through the Facebook and YouTube channel of the National Autonomous University of Mexico and the National Electoral Institute. My name is Beatriz Tobar Guerrero, and I am a member of the State Electoral Institute of Guanajuato State. In the name of the National Electoral Institute and the UNAM, I welcome you to our eighth session of our permanent series titled Democracy and Elections Around the World. And now we will talk about the situation in El Salvador in times of pandemics. It is important to mention that these series of gatherings have become a space of analysis in which different members of different electoral bodies throughout the world share their experiences about best practices and insights on the organization and development of electoral events in times of pandemics. Thanks to this reflection, insight, analysis, we have been able to learn throughout these 7 sessions from experts and electoral authorities from Latin America, Europe, and Africa, the many challenges that need to be faced in the organization of elections and to identify the many findings and document learning lessons. So in order to begin with our analysis, I would like to introduce, to begin with, Raúl Contreras Bustamante, the director of the School of Law of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, who will address the audience with a welcoming speech. Thank you, Beatriz Tovar, member of the Electoral Board of the Institute of Guanajuato. Thank you and hello to all of you that are being part of this live. Thank you to the members of the National Electoral Institute and the Autonomous University of Mexico. As Beatriz Tovar has already stated, we have today the pleasure to begin with our eighth session in this series of workshops. It's permanent, that talks about elections around the world, organized by the National Electoral Institute and the School of Law of the UNAM. As you well know, and for those of you that are following this event through social media in different countries throughout the world, on the first Sunday of June, we are going to have the elections that are considered as the largest and most complex of the history of our country. We are talking about elections in which we will have more than 92 million of voters going to the voting stations to elect more than 1,000 public posts, among which we have the House of Representatives, the Senate, many city halls, state congresses in the state and in Mexico City. For that reason, the National Electoral Institute and the School of Law of the UNAM decided to make an law compared analysis on how other electoral processes are being held that are actually more or less at the same time as ours. We have already analyzed the electoral processes in the United States and how they were held in Bolivia and in Chile. And today we are going to listen and we are going to pay attention and analyze to what happened in February 2021 in our sister country, the Republic of El Salvador. So we have as speakers today Mrs. Donna from the court of Esaú Rosas Garcia. We also have Felix Augusto Ulloa Garay. He is the Vice President of the Republic of El Salvador, the Central American Counselor Eugenio Chicas, and Luis Mario Rodriguez, Director of the Department of Political Studies of the School of the Escuela Centroamericana de Gobierno y Democracia from El Salvador. As I said, on February 28th, elections were organized in El Salvador, and they were organized within a process that has represented a lot of complications to all the countries in the world, the pandemics. So for the National Electoral Institute and for the School of Law of the UNAM, it's going to be very interesting to listen from the point of view of the main arbitration, Donna Martinez, how the Electoral Supreme Court functioned and how everything is working in order to validate the election, as well as of the other speakers that will share with us today the complications, the characteristics, the results, and the political perspective of El Salvador. Once again, welcome, and on behalf of the President of the National Electoral Institute, I welcome you, and we will pay close attention to your experiences. Lorenzo Cordova sent a message with his apologies because he had something else that came out suddenly, but he sends his kind regards. So let's go into this celebration of knowledge from the main actors of the elections in El Salvador, which is going to be very important for us in our process to be held in June. Thank you, Dr. Contreras Bustamante, for your message. Now, before we pass the floor to the table, we are going to pass the floor to Manuel Carrillo Poblano, representing the Councilor President Lorenzo Cordova of the National Electoral Institute. Manuel Rodrigo Poblano, he is also the coordinator with the Autonomous University of Mexico of this Carrillo, my apologies, Manuel Carrillo. Good morning, everyone. Raúl Contreras, Dr. Raúl Contreras, and all members of the panel that we will be talking about the elections in El Salvador. Our permanent seminar on democracy and elections has the purpose on thinking and reflecting on democracies. And reflecting will always add value, especially if we do it with respect and knowledge. Democracy is not a goal. It's a process that we have to perfect gradually as fast as possible, respecting individuality, independence, plurality, and inclusion, participation, and involvement. We need to preserve humanism that is part of the nature of democracy. Reflecting also opens the door to the learning of other experiences, other opportunities lived in other democracies of other places in the world. We now have extraordinary people from El Salvador participating in this panel, very well prepared with recent experiences. Recent experiences have shown to us that democracy needs to be cultivated day after day. It is also the responsibility of everyone, not only the politicians or the government. It is also the responsibility of the society. We are all responsible of this common house where we all live. The political story of El Salvador has been harsh since 1930 to 1979, with military coup d'etat, with many elections that were full of irregularities. After 1979 and 1992, El Salvador went into a political transformation with armed conflicts in the organization of elections. In the peace accords of 1992 between the Front Marabunda and the government, the end was marked. And the new agreements, the new peace accords, we have the point and the business of clean, free elections that started in 1994. And then after that, they've been fighting for the consolidation of democracy in elections. We have a lot to learn from their history. El Salvador decided to use democratic politics and not force politics. Violence, according to Sorel, rests in a pessimistic conception of life, fed by myths and not by ideas. Violence is egocentrical and it is also an over self-estimation. It is like getting drunk of oneself. Politics, the authentic one, is the one that can actually change things without excluding orders, seeking transformation, modifications, and adjustment with optimism so that the individual will match with what needs to be done by the community. Only authentic political will allow that community interest become common and own interest. So, dear audience, let's prepare ourselves to listen to the experiences of El Salvador. It's quite a complicated experience, full of information that is going to be very good for us and very well moderated by the counselor of the Electoral Supreme Court of El Salvador. Thank you, Manuel Carrillo, for your address. Thank you to the addresses of the two members that host this panel, this event. And now we will pass the floor to the table. As we have said before, we are celebrating because we have experts, great celebrities on this topic. So we begin with our table, elections in El Salvador, elections and governance in times of pandemics. I would like to repeat, even though it has already been said, who are the members of the panel, and in the name that I will mention them is the order, I'm sorry, in which they will participate. To begin with, we have the virtual presence of Dora Esmeralda Martinez de Barahona. She is the president of the Electoral Supreme Court of El Salvador. And thank you for being with us. We also have with us Dr. Luis Mario Rodriguez, Director of the Political Studies Department of the ECUSADES. Welcome. And we also welcome Dr. Eugenio Chicas, a representative of the Central American Parliament. And we also have Felix Ulloa, Vice President of the Republic of El Salvador. Welcome all. Before we start, I would like to give the instructions to our panel members. The duration of your participation is going to be up to 15 minutes. We have a timekeeper that will be shown on the panel, on the screen. And after the presentation of all the panel members, we will start our Q&A. So for those of you following us in social media, at the end of the presentations of each panel members, you are welcome to present your questions and comments, which will be addressed at the end. So with no further ado, we pass the floor to the first panel member, Dora Esmeralda Martinez de Barahona. Please, the floor is all yours. You have 15 minutes. Thank you, Beatriz, and thank you. Good morning, everyone. Raúl Contreras Bustamante, Director of the School of Law of the UNAM. Also, my regards, even though he's not present, to Dr. Lorenzo Cordova, Manuel Carrillo, dear friend of mine, I know you very well. Thank you for being the contact person for this invitation to be a participant of this permanent seminar of democracy and elections around the world. And also, my special greetings to the other panel members, Dr. Luis Mario Rodriguez, director of the School of Political Studies. We also, my regards to Eugenio Chicas, representative of the Central American Parliament. And this is also going to be very useful for the evaluation that he has, an observer of the elections that we just had. Also, my regards to Dr. Felix Ulloa, the Vice President of the Republic. An honor to be part of this member. And Beatriz, nice meeting you. And my regards once again to all the live participants through the social media. Congratulations for this idea of the UNAM and the INE to strengthen democracy by using this type of events. Strengthening democracy in the times of pandemics is something that we are not ready for. We sometimes planned things, but at the end of the day, things come out fine, and other things just turned into learnings. So it's a wonderful idea that as electoral bodies, we share the experiences of the elections, of past elections in our countries. And from these positive lessons, we can apply them in our electoral processes, taking into account the culture of each country, the complexity of the election in turn, and also from the negative lessons that we also learned, we as national electoral bodies can strengthen our links. I would like to share my screen. I don't know if I need to be authorized or if I already have the authorization. To begin with, in 2019, at the end, actually, we began to get ready for this event to be held on February 28th. It was something that was stated in 2019. It was said that the elections in El Salvador was going to be February 28, 2021. We also had the complexity that it was going to be 3 elections because it was going to be Congress. It was also going to be the House of Representatives for the Central American Congress and the local and national ones. And we also have a combined vote that I don't think Mexico has, and that is something that has complicated the elections and especially the way we do the vote counting, because in most countries what the population expects is that once an electoral process is closed, results are giving out. Who is winning and how are the percentages? So we had that challenge because in 2018 and in 2015, in the elections, we had technical issues and we were not able to give results as fast as the people wanted. So in 2020, we already had included all the electoral schedule, and that's how we started looking at the challenge. But before I go into explaining how we handle the pandemics, because I think that's the point of interest of all the people present and how we managed it in El Salvador, let me tell you that we began by verifying that taking into account the electoral framework, it was something that was ordered by the peace accords signed in Chapultepec in Mexico on January 16, 1992. That's when democracy started to be strengthened, and we started with a redesign for the elections. And that's when the electoral Supreme Court became the maximum authority for electoral matters. And we then have to go into these many things. We are located in the capital of our republic, but we have jurisdiction throughout the country. We are totally independent from the point of view of jurisdiction and administration. We manage a concentrated court, the electoral justice, and the administrative area also qualifies the elections and analyzes all the processes that the electoral code by law mandates. We are not dependent of any of other national bodies except for budget. Even though we are autonomous, we need to receive budget from the government, and this is something decided by Congress. The budget for our body is authorized by Congress. The resolutions of the tribunal or the court are mandatory, and most of them have been accepted and qualified. So this is how we have a juridical base where we are the administrators of electoral justice and administrative processes that are also part and ruled by the Constitution. And we also have decrees and resolutions that are created as jurisdictional body. During this election, we had 10 parties in the race in different modalities, the Congress and city halls and different ones. So we had a political context in which we need to had a lot of effort because we had lost popular support because what had happened in the community of El Salvador. So it was because of corruption cases that polarized the population, and that is why the population need to be prepared and in close attention. We had also to be attent to the possibility of violence. And because of the pandemics, we also realized that there was an increase in social media of political violence for women and for men. And it was mainly due to the fact that the pandemics forced us to use social media because of this social distance. So the way campaigns were done before changed. So electoral campaigns were carried out in social media, and the authority had to issue and resolve on many issues. I believe that the court, in this case, with lesson learned in the area of managing these social media campaigns, was a little passive because because there were not enough times because of the complexity of the pandemics. We had to manage the process. We knew that it was a challenge. We knew that it had to do it well, even though there were so many fraud filings. There were also a backlog in the action regarding. However, we did our best trying to regulate social media with campaigns that were to be done by ordinance of law. But many, many times we canceled a video or a campaign. In maybe a few days, there was another one with the same faults. And there were more and more videos. It's very, very difficult to control social media, and that was one of the main challenges of the electoral body. And it's something that needs to be taken into account so that you are not overwhelmed because we are not prepared to face them at the time they started. We weren't, at least. I can dare to say the results of these elections were known at an international level for all the political forces of all the observing countries. And we opened or doors to national and international observers. And that actually helped in our process because at the end of the day, they knew that the elections were managed in a transparent, fair, and democratic manner, even though the pandemic was in its peak. It was, February, but everything was organized and carried out in accordance. The way the campaigns were done by the Electoral Institute regarding the pandemic measures was also very important because we already had candidates. We already had the candidates' names. So that's how we started with a redesign of the sanitary measures to be implemented because everybody said, how can you think about elections with the pandemics going on? But there is something that needs to be said. In our constitution, in the El Salvador political constitution, we cannot modify an electoral schedule because the constitution says that on May the 1st, the post needed to be effective, especially for Congress. So we cannot modify or reform the date of the elections because we didn't have time. So the only thing that we had time for was to redesign the electoral processes with sanitary measures. And that is where we started to analyze other experiences. There were other countries that had organized elections before ourselves. So we learned from them how to do them ourselves. And I also remember that the uh, Organization of American States also issued guidelines for this purpose, and we tailored them to our country, taking into account the observations by electoral bodies in all the elections carried out last year. So that's how we started creating our own sanitary measures. We were also helped by another thing. We took into account the bodies and offices that were going to be part of it. For example, the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health needed to be part so that we could actually be in the same channel on which were the measures to not spread the virus. So we organized tables with staff from the Department of Health and staff from the electoral body saying yes to this, no to this one. I remember perfectly, for example, the temperature taking. Some said no, some said yes, and then they said yes, because that created trust in the population. So that's how we started to establish or sanitary measures. And then we also included the Department of Education. It was an important actor in this. We started to, with their help, to spread out the protocol. And the spread out of all this information needs to be very effective because the population needs to hear that we are going to have elections, but we are going to have elections with sanitary measures. So we develop little by little the trust in the population to go and issue their vote because it was going to be a safe act. We had the members of population and we had meetings, presentations to generate that trust that was needed at the time of applying the measures.
I remember that the Secretariat of Health, together with those responsible for elections, to launch this campaign in social media and also to spread all this in schools so that in election day, a vote could be casted. So we all plan for open spaces. Another thing that we designed for the temporary bodies, that is the members of the polling stations, was to launch instructions so that they could easily see how these measures would be taken and how these measures were going to be applied to those that were in charge of implementing them among themselves and towards the population. So all these instructions were given online and also physically, so that 95,000 people were trained on this method. A health protocol was implemented physically, and also there was a training on the health measures and the instructions I was speaking about. Also, the package was contained all the face masks, and mouth covers, everything that was going to be used. Also, everything that was recommended in order to disinfect hands, sanitizing gel, everything. And also the pen that was going to be used in order to mark the ballot. There are some election bodies that they have provided the pen or pencil in order for people to feel safe. However, we were very careful on disinfecting all the supplies in order to manipulate all this. Also, previously to this, everything was decontaminated in order to prevent the spread. Also, we use this special ink with a special chemical in order for the population to feel safe. So we use like a cotton ball for the people so that they could be cleaned up. It was very well accepted by the population. It was a disposable Q-tip that was used. So this helped us so that most of the population felt safe while casting the vote. Also, we overcome this percentage of 54.60% of the voters, even though of the pandemics. And we had more people voting.
Sí, muchas gracias, maestra. Le
Thank you very much. So, would you please finish your presentation? Yes, thank you very much. It's difficult to keep up time. So in summary, we can state that the measures that were required or that we designed for the purposes of using them in February 28 was that we had a successful elections day. And the children were not allowed to attend. Also, we had some seniors attending a specific times of the day. And as we said, we decontaminated everything, shoes, everything. All the spaces were suitable for this. People were not on the line. But schools, since they were opened and we use 2-meter social distancing, people would attend 5 minutes before the right time. There were no crowds because the lines of people were effective. And for example, we have experienced that if we take groups by groups, then it was more difficult to us. So we decided to have them on the line with the right social distancing in order to prevent crowds. Well, this was my presentation. If you have any comments or questions, we could have them at the special QA at the end. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. It is so difficult to present this experience and the challenge that is posed in these elections. I mean, to explain in 15 minutes is so very difficult. I think that this last thing you were mentioning, that you overcome the participation percentage from citizens, this is very, very valuable. And this has to do with the trust that you conveyed of people in this campaign on the health measures that were going to be taken. So we really acknowledge the efforts by your country. And now we will have Dr. Luis Mario Rodriguez, who is the director of the Political Studies Department. Yes, doctor, you have the floor for 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Beatriz. I would like to thank the authorities of the National Electoral Institute and the School of Law of the Autonomous University of Mexico. My greetings to the Vice President of the Republic of Salvador, and also the President of the Supreme Court, Electoral Court, and Mr. Genochica, who is the member of a congressman of Central America. So before I start my presentation, I would like to express my solidarity with INE. So do please convey my greetings to all the councilors, and we are really taking into consideration all the attacks that have been received, that is actually impacting this electoral times. And let me now share my screen with you.
¿Ve la pantalla completa, Beatriz?
Sí, se ve. Perfecto.
Can you see the full screen? All right, thank you very much. So this is the background of 2021 elections. El Salvador was experiencing a similar scenario as those in Latin America. This has been characteristic to elections in the whole continent, a low trust and confidence towards democracy by citizens. And for approximately 10 or 15 years, the Americas meter and Latin meter has shown this. And also the citizens that are not aware of the regime that is dictating the politics, because a high percentage of a great part or a large part of the continent wants to live in a democratic or non-democratic environment, not because respect for political issues, but in terms of having efficient public services, public safe, that is posing a risk to democracy, and also a low credibility in the post-war parties, those that were created in the 80s, and that from the peace agreement had been entering to the presidency of the Republic until 2019, when this third party won the presidency of the Republic. As in other countries, there were scandals by traditional parties, a lack of compliance of promises. So this democracy legitimate exercise that we are missing in Latin American countries, and its consolidation. Like in other countries, we have the anti-politics as the main character of elections, and certainly populism with assistance programs that were not ensuring sustainability in times or in the financial level, and also political clientelism in order to attain the right votes in elections. And in El Salvador specifically, we have a relevant political fact that really underlined this. That was an army that attacked on February 9 and abuse that was experienced during the pandemics in the region. I'm speaking about the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, the Court for Human Rights, also the expression of the Human Rights Commission, the UN, by Michelle Bachelet, also abuses that were experienced in El Salvador. So this whole context took us to a quite polarized election, but the electoral body was successful in the end. We had 6,991 cases in the pandemics. Nevertheless, elections were carried out on the due date, the same as with the previous elections, that is internal elections, and the Supreme Electoral Court promoted biosafety measures. It could have been, some reforms could have been approved or passed that would incentivize elections, like, for example, anticipated elections, elections by mail, different schedules. These were all suggested. They could have been approved or passed. In spite of this, everything was organized, and the president of the Electoral Court has already mentioned this. The budget, the extraordinary budget of the electoral body has been scheduled differently. This has been an issue for the elections, and also the Supreme Electoral Body had this shortening of the budget. So some civic campaigns were launched, and I will be presenting one to you. The Supreme Electoral Court has been introducing this with a very little time. A quite important aspect was the technology that was implemented by the Supreme Electoral Body. It had very good results in the night of the election days, and it prevented some inconsistencies. The presidents delayed the opening of some centers, and they decided that the Supreme Electoral Court would solve this in social media. So in terms of organization, the Supreme Electoral Court was very diligent. So as I said, you can see the budget. We had some campaigns for young people so that they could get the unique ID before elections. So out of 30,000 young people, only 6,000 did. This was greater than the 2019 elections. But if this was done differently, then more young people could have voted. Now, in terms of the conditions of the elections day, we certainly experienced some issues. First of all, we found some official taking of advantage, the use of public media to promote government parties, and mainly the mass media that had been sequestered because of corruption. And there is this one body that has this goal. They were used to promote candidates and the government party. Our financing system is of a mixed character. There we have a public finances that is known as political debt. For the very first time, we did not deliver it to the political parties, this down payment. And of course, the elections were not equalized. There was an early campaign by all the political parties, and the court penalized some of them, but several complaints were filed. Officials prevailed of its office to perform party politics The OAS showed that the silence, the electoral silence, was not met. The president, the same as in 2019, he had this press conference, and it was called Operación Remate, and the Supreme Court took action. But yes, there was a silence. Also, there was a narrative of the electoral fraud. There was political violence, some assassination of some followers, hatred campaigns, and more than 50 offenses to press only into the election dates. The electoral arbitrator showed a decision, like, for example, in the registration of candidacies, some reached the Supreme Court of Justice, and also the court of the electoral court used technology. Some justices said that they would use the old system, and some said that they didn't want to. So finally, they used the new platform. There was a lack of promptness. This is an area of improvement, and there was a sudden change of regulations in the final scrutiny. The one that is carrying out this scrutiny is the temporary parties, and so the regulations were changed. Political parties could be surveilling this or oversight. This is the budget, and there is a trend towards the government party, according to the monitoring that was done by citizens, keeping 79 or 70% for the government party. This made by the organization or electoral body. Regarding the parties, the polling stations gave advantage to the official party, 55 representatives. So we have one representative for the qualified majority to make critical decisions set forth by the Constitution with no issues at all. They will have the support of the party of 2019. So El Salvador has this proportional electoral system for legislative votes that is favoring populism, and the parties are quite realistic. There is a plurality of parties, but the one governing is just one party in terms of a deliberate democracy, and we will see how it will behave when the new legislator will take the post in May 1st. We have 74 municipalities participating out of the 84. The president was mentioning that right now they're being trained. We're happy for that. And of course, other participations that are involved in the training, and also political education and civic education to attain this. So we are continuing this training for all the representatives. In terms of the women participation, there was a reduction from 49 to 44, and another from 26 to 24. There are still restrictions for the participation of women in politics, and also violence in politics, mostly in social media. In terms of municipality councils in local governments, the government party obtained the majority, and also there was a drop in terms of representatives and the non-traditional parties. And something, well, you can see that the votes that were annulled in 2019 is very high, more than 190,000 votes, and the number was diminished in 2001. The president asked for the vote to be annulled. So this was an announcement of what could happen in 2019, because the traditional parties were rejected. So we have to review the legislation to achieve parity in gender, the participation of women in politics. We have to solve inequality issues that we had in the 2021 elections. It's important for the court to reinforce audits, mainly the one that has to do with the political finances and electoral justice. We have to professionalize the electoral body to have reforms, projects of reforms. We are still lacking lawyers that are specialized on these electoral matters. Some other institutions, control institutions, have to be involved in this in order to prevent corruption into the politics corruption. And we have to approve the budget for elections. And finally, it is necessary, as in other electoral bodies and other systems, to have a permanent civic campaigns. So, Beatriz, that was my presentation. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Doctor, for your participation. It is so important to take a look at this perspective from the academic scope and from the education and civic scope when elections are being held in so complex arenas. Not only the pandemics is providing us with this scenario, but also the polarization, the low trust and credibility. In these scenarios, it is that that we required perfectly trained electoral bodies that have the technical skills, also to have a true participation of the electoral court in El Salvador. Thank you very much for your presentation, Doctor. And now we will have Dr. Eugenio Chicas, who is a representative of the Central American Congress. Yes, Dr. Eugenio, you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you. Kind regards to each one of the members present, and my acknowledgement to the organizers of this wonderful event that by all means contribute to the strengthening of democracy, not only in our countries, but also in all the Americas. Let's go into this subject matter. For the case of El Salvador, I think that we have to take into account which were the political enigmas that we had at the time of the beginning of the electoral day. They're not only talking about the day of voting, but taking into account the background of all the days in which we organized the electoral event. This political climate was marked by the lack of union, political union, ongoing confrontation that we can actually talk about intimidation to political actors, to means of communication, to the organizations of civil society. And this polarization was actually a result of the President of the Republic remarks, who had a very important participation in social media. He is very active and he uses it to rule and manage his government. So as part of this political climate, we were able to see the lack of financing, not only for the political parties in the race, and they have right, according to law, to receive up to 75% of the state finances, even to the day before the election, to do their electoral campaign. However, by an express decision of the President of the Republic, the political parties did not receive any money. And that, of course, made the electoral campaigns suffer. Then we were also part of a systematic campaign from this political system of making it less strong. All the electoral bodies, including the state and the federal one, which was constantly attacked by the President of the Republic, Mr. Bukele, and by his political party, which was the party in government. So all these attacks questioned the transparency of the electoral court, I believe, in an unfair and improper manner, because I believe that the President of the Republic, the political party in office, have not filed any evidence of the alleged fraud that they filed before the election day. So by making the electoral arbitration weakened, that actually created a drop in the credibility of the Supreme Electoral Court in the eyes of the population. The court has actually developed very well. However, these systematic attacks made the court look a little weak. Also, the lack of accreditation of the peace process in the country. The President of the Republic attacked the soul, the core of the peace accords. His government has been characterized by pushing these peace accords to the side. It was a very important peace accord, not only for the people of El Salvador, by reducing the armed conflict, but also for other processes and for the international community. Actually, the United Nations has said that by having but that by having that it was one of the most successful peace accords. And Mexico, for example, as part of our friends, helped in the creation and signing of this peace accord, which has now been put aside by the President of the Republic. Besides that, as part of this adverse political climate, we were also witnesses of crimes of physical elimination of political opponents. In this case, from the Frente Farabundo Martí, people were killed, members of that political parties, and these processes are still in the table of the justice courts. So the political climate was quite complex during the electoral process. Lives were taken, and that was combined with the impact of the pandemics, that to the case of Salvador, for a population around 6 million inhabitants, according to official figures, we have a little more than 2,000 deaths by COVID and a little more than 67,000 cases proved with COVID, and a collapsed economy in which, in the worst times of the pandemics, the exports of our country dropped to 24%. The GDP of our country dropped in 8%. We lost a lot of jobs. Many companies closed their doors because of the way in which the pandemics was managed. So the economic and human cost for the country because of that bad or mismanagement had to do in the context of the elections, not only because we lost lives because of the pandemics, but also because we had social and economic impact in our country, which based upon international bodies, poverty that was 26% has risen to around 40%. So we are talking about an extraordinary and very dangerous growth of poverty in our country as a result of the pandemic and also as a result on how it has been managed. And it was under that context that the election day took place. So an election day like this also had financial costs that were increased because of logistics, because of now the biosafety protocol with which we could guarantee the safety, the integrity, the health, and the lives of the population. Actually, the different international missions of observers have acknowledged the well performance of the Supreme Electoral Court of El Salvador, not only because they had a good management of biosafety protocol, but also because of the management of a very complex electoral process that, taking into account all the reforms that it had undergone, it was a very complex process. So according to my opinion, that matches the opinion of specialized bodies, the Supreme Electoral Court came out well out of this electoral organization because it guaranteed biosafety, because it implemented technological novelties for the election day. And all of these is very important for the strengthening of democracy in our country. I believe we have had challenges. In this case, the personal and social distancing has forced us to implement online processes that, of course, complicated many procedures that needed to be with the electoral body because they became more complex and with an incredible involvement regarding, for example, training, virtual training for the members of the election tables. Not all the members of the election tables were in the same level of technological knowledge, but also the availability of connectivity. We have many, many dark spots in our country where we don't have connectivity, and that complicated the organization of the electoral process. For example, President Martinez has already given us examples on how digital campaigns, social media campaigns were really peaked. They were so large, and it was so hard to manage them and supervise them and oversee them. And that represented a very important challenge, especially with respect to the equality in the race. The race was marked by the abuse by the government of the Republic, the President Bukele, the excessive authoritarianism that he has shown in our country, which has been pointed out and criticized by non-for-profit organizations, by the civil society, and for international bodies that have shown their concern, including the illegal use of state funds in electoral campaigns, the abuse of public officers that should not participate in political campaigns, and all that has complicated the quality of the electoral process. And a fundamental issue is the money, not only because the political parties did not receive their budgets, but also because the municipalities of our countries, we have actually already been, it's been already a whole year, have not been receiving the finance that needs to be sent from the federal government. And that has, of course, put at stake the performance of the mayors with respect to the infrastructure and works that they had to do in their municipalities, therefore having an impact in political campaigns based upon the results of the current mayor of that municipality, and all because of this intention of the Republic's government to cut the budget for the municipalities. So many things have been said by the lack of credit of traditional political parties. And I think that is true. And it is generating a political transition in our country that has the consequences of the result that we have. And the president of the country now is making decisions that, for the case of El Salvador, have privileged an emerging political force that is represented by the president and his party, and which has been very well valued and supported by the population. And I believe that that is a very clear case that needs to be acknowledged. And on the other side, the lack of credit of traditional parties. This lack of credit of political parties, actually Arena and the FML, I think that it's mainly due to their lack of capacity to reach agreements in the 30 years after the peace accord were signed. I believe that both parties, first during the 20 years, the FNEL started to block and boycott the management of the party in office. And then the 10 years of that party in office, Arena did exactly the same, block and boycott and impede the development of their government program. So both forces polarized and they were unable to become in agreement to decide on a path for the social and economic development of the country. It is important to say that the peace accords actually established important economic, political, and democratic changes. However, economic and social changes were put aside because they were not correlated. So they were not addressed at the peace accord. So those topics were pulled back into or were put further into time, and there was not enough time to reach an agreement to decide on which was going to be the destiny of the country in social and economic matters. Now, this is in the hands of the new government team. And I believe that now, because of the many things that have happened, they are now forced to answer the expectations of the population. And what we see now in our country is that now we see that all these physical crises, the low economic growth, and also the increase of poverty. So the challenge is on the table. And so we need to know how the new government is going to face the lack of this that was not faced by the other forces. And this has also to do with the respect of the country. And that's another challenge that needs to be faced here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Eugenio Chicas, for giving us this perspective that you have with respect to the context and the economic, political, and social situation among which the electoral process took place in El Salvador. Now I pass the floor to Felix Ulloa. He is the Vice President of the Republic of El Salvador. The floor is all yours. You have 15 minutes.
Hello, good morning. I greet the organizers of this event, the speakers who are with us today, the presenter, the moderator. She's been excellent, guiding us all, and of course, the general public that is online listening to us. I will be sharing the experience in El Salvador, the political and the politics and democracy in the days of pandemics. We have had several elections in the continent during the pandemics. In the Dominican Republic, Bolivia, in Ecuador very recently, in Peru, and of course in El Salvador. So the behavior, according to the turnout database of IDEA International, has been seeing behaviors, this behavior towards an increasing level, and also a good success, even though the pandemics. Well, we have not, we are not in the same level as in Bolivia or Jamaica that showed a decrease in elections. However, it's important to mention that we have a significant increase in a parliamentarian municipal elections that we hadn't had in the whole elections history in the last years. We surpassed 50% of in the electoral body. So traditionally, we've had a 47%. So in spite of the pandemics, citizens were quite motivated to vote, to participate. Because of bio safety, we had some limitations, but in spite of this, the population was involved. And this needs to be underlined because the arena, the context was not reflecting what was happening. And it's not a matter of having a polemics or to fight with all this. But in the interpretation, in politics that lost elections through their own parties. And I'm speaking about the TML or the Chica, who has been the leader of this party, or the case of Luis Mario, even though that he is now representing himself or introducing himself as a political issues. He was the candidate of the president. So this is totally of a political party nature. I think it's worth mentioning the important facts that we have experienced, like political violence and murders. This is totally false. There were some people that died and that who were injured. There were some gunshots after a soccer game. Unfortunately, some of these people were linked to the FMLN party. So it's been under discussion that who shot first. So the political violence, it's given when there is a purpose of attacking a specific place or site, like in the past, where when we had elections during war. So this did not happen. So it's worthwhile clearing all this. On the other side, the funding and how or why this political debt was not delivered to the party or the fund that was promised. So the Secretary of Finance explained all this. We had some changes in the budget and also the management of resources or funds that is supported by a resolution of the Constitution to have these cases a priority. And in the times of pandemics, it was much more important to address the health of the population and not to address the reasons from the municipalities to have that funds. In the end, what they needed was these funds to be invested in the parties. They wanted to invest all this in the campaigns because they were lacking of funds. So this is given from our own perspective, but facts are facts. And now moving to the subject, I think it's worthwhile trying to understand why or how during the pandemics, the Salvadorans actually voted en masse. So several analysts and several international bodies and newspapers, there was this article called The Irritated or Overwhelmed Democracies in these regions, like in Chile, for example, and in Bolivia. And there was a discontent that has been consistent in democracies in the 70s or 80s. The Latin barometer has been reported that citizens are not satisfied with the results of the democracy. So this, and there has been a lack of trust and credibility in the body, in the congresses, or in the instrument of democracies or political parties. We have not understood this correctly, nor interpret all this correctly in the Salvadoran communities. This is why we have had the upsiders back in the 90s, and very recently in the crisis of political parties, we have seen like Macron in France with his movement through the pillars of the fifth French democracy, the socialist, and within a year he organized his own party and he overthrew these parties. In Mexico, for example, we have the Morena party, and which was successful versus the PRI and PAN, the traditional political parties, and also in the United States, how an internal force of the Republican Party overthrew the traditional ways with this so very different leadership. The same as in Brazil. Well, not in El Salvador. We have completed this 30-year term after or post the war, and the system with these two parties were playing this game. When Varela was was ruling, there was a boycott from the other party. So people realized all this and they decided to change all this. This was carried out from the moment this was announced in 2018 elections, when a message was conveyed by this, he was not even the candidate, but he was a major. He was having this old politics. So in 2018, there were so many groups, and the votes were annulled. And in 2019, in spite of all the barriers, and of course, we are not telling this story, it is when there was a high possibility of participating with his own political party at that time. So when it was registered as a Cambio Democrático, the constitutional forces ordered to cancel this party, and the Supreme Electoral Court of that age canceled this party. So the officials, as well as the justices, of the Supreme, gave this resolution to prevent President Bukele from having a part in the elections. So mass media, of course, were involved, because one of the things that he announced in this new legislature is that this was announced by the newspapers that the tax was not going to be paid. And of course, we had other institutions called as non-profit, that they have made a multi-millionaire business that has been enjoyed by them. So this is, with this status quo, people understood the call from President Bukele, and he won in 2019. But there was still missing to turn democracy. And it was the recent elections when the president asked the population to allow him to have a Congress, legislative assembly that will facilitate the project to change the country, because the legislative the ruling legislative assembly during the whole term from June the 1st to 2019 until today, it was just in charge of hindering the president's projects. And as he says, he really wants to have the old governability, the political stability, and the harmony between the legislative and executive in El Salvador. That is known as the black suitcase. That is the bribe the executive was doing towards the legislative, with the legislative court. This is not happening anymore. So this is why we have a trouble between the Legislative Assembly and the Executive. And to finish and to close my presentation, I would like to share with you a reflection, because we have to look into the future. We have to turn the page. History, the actual history and challenge of the new El Salvador will start in June the 1st, when the new Legislative Assembly started working, and the result has been, as many have said, that is a support reference for this president, a president that reached with 90% or more of his performance. And of course, we have the 10% that is not in agreement. Here, they want, what he wants is to leverage the power granted by the people, and that has had the majority, that this president has had the majority of votes. I think this is the most important thing to mention, because the design of the electoral system in El Salvador was such that no political party could have absolute control of Congress. This was done in 1963, when we moved from the majority system to the proportional system. And until today, no party had won in the Congress by itself. They had to look for agreements and covenants. But with this result, as my friend Alberto says, that there was an electoral rebellion. But for me, it's a peaceful rebellion. The people surpassed this regulation framework. It was impossible that the political parties before, after the war, that had attained this percentage. So the president by himself has won over the simple majority and the qualified majority. Therefore, he has total power or total force to implement his program. And this is where we see the true challenge. So there is a democratic balance in this very young person, this millennial. We are so used to the traditional politics, the traditional ways politics follows. And when we have this person from this totally digital or generation, it's difficult to understand, but the facts are facts. So right now, we are still to know which are the ways to manage such power, and to do this in a legitimate, spontaneous, democratic manner for the Salvadorans, by no doubt. Now, how these measures will be implemented in this country, and also with information provided by banks and international agencies, is that we have the possibility of growing economically of equivalent to 4 points. So the growth challenge, and to prevent issues such as migration, violence in communities, crime, unemployment. These have been problems that we have seen from the FMLN. We're going to be able to fight all this. So this will be the challenge as of May 1st next year. Thank you very much. And I hope I respected time, or I met the time. No, you took 15 minutes. So thank you very much for your participation. And now we will have the Q&A session. We have some questions already. So we will start with the Q&A. Well, first, I will be reading them, as some of them are specific to some speakers, some are general questions. So when I finish reading them, we will start with the session. We will open the floor.
The first question is for Ms. Martinez. The question is, how was the international observation carried out? Could you elaborate on that topic? And also another question for her, but also addressed to Dr. Luis Mario Rodriguez. is there a system that you have used to increase the participation in political aspects of women so that we can have gender equity in candidates and political representation? For Dr. Eugenio Chicas, it says, the question says, what do you suggest so that political parties can increase the participation of the society and to raise the levels of credibility and trust in young people? And last question that is for all panel members, if you can make a comment, including, of course, Dr. Felix Ulloa, what's the impact to democracy in El Salvador, the maras or the organized groups, organized crime groups? So those are the questions so far. I pass the floor in the same order as you participated, and we will begin with Professor Martinez indicate on how the electoral observation was carried out. We did a reduction by creating limits, boundaries, because there were organizations that wanted to have up to 2,000 people in the observation mission. So we took into account the request and we established limits. First, that it was only going to be 500 people so that we could reduce the number of people because of the pandemics and because we cannot allow just a number that could maybe endanger the organization, the management. So that's what we did. We created this limit. And then also the way that international bodies were going to go into the electoral places. I am sorry, but I can't hear what she's saying. Um, my apologies. It looks like we have internet problem. Maybe Professor Martinez had a technical issue. While she gets on it, let's pass the floor to the other members of the panel. So we pass the floor to
Con mucho gusto, Beatriz, respecto
Dr.
de
Luis
los
Mario
incentivos de
Rodriguez.
participación
Yes,
política de
sure.
mujeres.
With respect to the
En
incentives for the
efecto,
political
es un tema
participation of
que ha
women,
venido
yes,
empujándose
it
no
is a
solo
topic that has
desde la
been
sociedad civil
pushed
organizada,
not
sino
only
también
from
desde
the
los grupos
organized
parlamentarios
civil or
o reformas
society, but also
respecto
from
a políticos
parliamentary groups. We
respecto
made
de
reforms with respect to political
instancias o
parties,
candidatos
forcing
donde
them
ese
to have
30%
in their
sean mujeres.
candidate
El
roster
tema
at least
es que
30% women.
ciertamente se
And the
cumple
truth
ese
is that
requerimiento,
they do
pero
meet
luego ese
that
30%
premise.
o ese
However, that
porcentaje que no
30%,
participan,
a high
pues
percentage of that
limita,
30%
es decir,
are
se
actually
reduce
just
las
substitutes.
candidaturas de
So
mujeres
they
independientes,
use it
¿ya?
for
Y
the
el número
substitute
de candidatos
post for most
propiamente
of the
femeninos. Creo
representatives.
que eso es
And
algo
the
que
owners of the
debemos
post are
resolver.
men.
Por
So that is
supuesto
something
que
that
de
needs to
hacia
be
la
solved.
paridad,
Of course, we
por
have to
primera
work
vez
together towards
diferentes
parity. For
internacionales
the first time, an
y organizaciones
international
sociales
cooperating body and
nacionales
organizations of national civil society, national organizations of civil society
potencia política
created a campaign to
participativa
avoid and
en las
reduce
elecciones.
political
Hemos tenido
violence,
una
gendered-based
serie
political
de
violence. We have had
donde las mujeres
very
fueron víctimas
unfortunate
de,
events
yo
in
podría
which
mencionar
women
violencia
have
digital,
become
que
victims
están
of
denunciadas
digital
en el
terrorism.
cargo
That's
público
how I would
tribunales
like to call
que
it.
les han
And
condenado
they
a
have,
años
charges have been
de
pressed
campaña
against them in appropriate courts. And of course, that's the purpose of the campaign, to avoid and reduce all that. And there are other organizations, especially my organization, through the School of Government. And we have also made efforts to strengthen gender-based leadership. The pandemics also had important consequences to health, but it also increased the use of virtual events. And in the case of El Salvador, we were able to reach the 14 departments of the Republic with 14 leader women in a training course that was organized and inaugurated by Rebecca Grinston, and it was closed by the Vice President a woman of Costa Rica. So that's another thing that was organized towards that topic. And to conclude, to finish, political parties must begin with a promotion of gender-based leadership. We saw it during the election in February. Great profiles of professional women that maybe in the internal elections and in the rule that I mentioned at the beginning of my answer need to be improved in order to actually achieve parity. Thank you, Luis Mario. Now we pass the floor to Eugenio Chicas to answer the questions posed to him and to all the panel members. So the question was in which way political parties can actually incentivize the participation of the youth. Well, I guess it has to do with the search of the generational swap within the political parties by creating new methods with the involvement of young people, but not just as labor, but as members to be part of the political parties and then to become part of the political posts, of the public ones, of public office. And I also believe it is important to include the demands of youth in the political party's agenda, because I think young people are now more sensitive to political aspects, to the use of water as a human right, to climate change, to access to higher education, and all those topics need to be included in the political party's agenda so that young people can actually see in their agenda the topics that I care about. On the other hand, I also believe that the inclusion of new communication means including new trends such as social media that in this case offer two-way communication, because young people not only expect to receive information and communication from political parties, they also want to be listened from them, by them, that the political parties listen to their demands, to their concerns, to the political parties about the problems of the countries. So the modern methods of social media offer these two-way communication. And I also believe that ethics, transparency, and access to information topics are very important. We need to recover the credibility of political parties regardless of their ideology. All of them need to implement methods with which ethics, transparencies, and full access to information is guaranteed. So that's the answer to the question. Thank you. And now, if Felix Ulloa would like to answer the last question about the maras and organized crime impact in the democracy of El Salvador. Well, of course, this group represent a threat to the democracy of El Salvador and to other democracies because it is a transnational issue. organized crime has to do not only with the countries in the north of Central America, but also of many other countries where these criminal groups have started operations. So yes, it was one of the main demands of Presidente Bukele to guarantee the security of the society, to reduce the territory of organized crime, to bring them back to the society because it was not ruled by the government. And since 1st of June 2019, when the government took office, we started implementing the plan that we called territorial control. It's a 7-phased program. We have implemented 2. We were about to start the 3rd phase when the pandemic started and activities were shift, of course. So we were not able to continue with the 3rd stage. But stage 1, stage 2, we were able to recover territories. And that was the first action. And the second action was to bring public utilities to these communities. Third stage had to do with community developments to generate spaces for social gathering, community gathering, and to bring back um, decency to the communities. So by using the force of the state, the presence of public force with the army is what helped us to substantially reduce violence in the communities. For the very first time in the last 20 years, we have had reports of days with zero criminal events, zero homicides as a result of criminal violence. And at the beginning, we had a 2-digit figure as daily average of homicide. So in that line, the vision of the President Bukele in territorial control, the plan that I told you about, is working. So we have 7 stages, and we hope that with the new Congress, we are in the possibility of going into the 3rd stage. It's actually a loan of 109 million that had been approved by the Central American Support Bank for the 3rd stage of this territorial control plan. For this new Congress, we hope that these obstacles are overcome and that we are able to implement the programs and better programs in this matter. Thank you very much, Dr. Félix Ulloa. We have now back Dora Esmeralda Martinez, and she had some technical problems. And if you please, Professor Dora Esmeralda Martinez, could you conclude with your presentation or with your answer to the question about the international observation in the elections in El Salvador in February?
Thank you very much. We have 3,500 observers, 1,200 international observers. Many of them were not able to travel because of the pandemics, but the important thing about observations is the management as an electoral body has to be made. The Foreign Affairs Ministry and the Health Ministry worked in order to allow people to travel as observers. So we also managed previously to the exit of these people to perform a PCR test on them so that they can submit the results of this test into the countries that we're going to be traveling to. So this partnership was made with the secretariats. So we provided a good care, a good communication. Also, we have some specific units for those people that may have a health effect. So everything was planned and organized to provide a good care, and so that people would feel safe with this health measures implemented. And there was a good access to international bodies that were 100% involved, also to mass media, different organizations. They were all supported and trained previously on how this process was going to work during the pandemics. Likewise, the National Civil Police did a very good job to deploy the safety measures and to provide an actual protection to observers that came to the country for the election. So this was the process that we followed. It was organized, as I said, and there was a partnership with the different public institutions that supported these observations during the pandemics. And also, we found the different ways of doing so. Well, thank you very much for your comments regarding this electoral observation topic and the measures that you were able to implement for this purpose. So this analysis session is now coming to an end. It was a great honor to guide all of you in this democracy and politics session specifically taking a look at El Salvador's election. And now we will have a licenciado Manuel Carrillo Poblano, so that on behalf of the National Electoral Institute, as well as the National Autonomous University of Mexico, to address closing remark in this event. Thank you. Thank you very much, Estela Tovar. Thank you very much for moderating this session. And I would like to thank the president of the Electoral Court in El Salvador and the members of this analysis session. The quality, the expertise was truly valuable. This is what I promised, and we had all this. They have offered us a series of very valuable reflections, as Dr. Ulloa was mentioning. The good stuff will come after June the 1st. We have had this on the table for a long time, democracy governance, because we have been solving the original issue, that is to exercise democracy, and that has to undergo with different standards. I think that the society is expecting effective governments. We are also privileged to witness that we are not having changes in this specific age. We are changing the politics, the crisis of the traditional politics of political parties, as our friends from El Salvador has demonstrated this to us. And thank you again, Beatriz, for moderating the session, and the general public, who is also attentive to the workshops that have been organized by the School of Law and the Institute. Will be providing you the information of this next workshop, which will be about Mexico. It's going to be very interesting. Thank you.
Pues listo, terminamos.
Muy bien, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
El último día es el 10 de abril. No lo dejes para el último. Si no la recoges, no podrás votar en las elecciones más grandes de la historia. El 6 de junio, el voto sale y vale.
INE.